Partly human monsters have always been fascinating. Mermaids were a mixture of a lovely lady and a large fish. The god Pan was half man, half goat. The Greek centaurs were half man, half horse. And to a certain extent, we still enjoy mixing animals and humans. Yogi Bear and Tom and Jerry are sometimes more human than humans. In this old book, called An Encyclopedia of Monsters, there's a collection of all the strange, half-human creatures that were once considered quite seriously to exist somewhere in the world. The lamia, a wild night creature of the forests with a woman's face and a scaly body. The manticora, a lion with a man's head and 3 rows of teeth, like shark's teeth. The satyr, a most rare and seldom seen beast. Big ears, 4 eyes. The dog-headed man, and the cat-faced woman, and many, many more. People with huge feet that turn backwards, people with tails, people with webbed feet, giants with 1 eye, peoples with faces in their chests and no heads. There seems to be no limit to our monstrous imaginations. But what's interesting is how ancient and how widespread these strange ideas are. The stories about wild men from the East with huge ears like elephants came to us from the ancient Greeks. But he appears again in the story of Sinbad the Sailor from the Arabian Nights, though now he's grown into a terrible giant as well. Even more strangely, here's a Chinese version of Big Ears. He comes from a very ancient Chinese book, the Shanhai Qing, written at about the same time as the Greek stories. And on another page, an odd Chinese creature without a head, but with a face in its chest. And even now, we still describe elves and pixies as having odd-shaped ears, and even Mr. Spock from Star Trek is recognizably from another world because of his large and pointed ears. But when these books were written, they weren't at all sure whether or not the people they described really existed. There's a lot of ancient stories about little people. This is The Mirror of the World, a book of wonders that was written in the Middle Ages and one of the first books ever printed. This chapter is called Of the Strange People of Ind, that's India. In every region, there be many peoples. There be a manner of people without wit, like madmen, which King Alexander named Goths and Magoths. Also, there dwelleth people that be horned, and people that are but 2 cubits high. This people is called pygmans, and be as little as dwarfs. Well, the ancient Chinese had similar stories about pygmans, and so did the Greeks, and they said these little people came from the mountains of India. There's no existing race of pygmies in India, but perhaps there once were. In the Colombo Anthropological Museum in Sri Lanka, among the primitive stone tools collected from the past are some very, very tiny stone axes. Were they used once upon a time by a lost race of little people? After all, it wasn't until 1887, less than 100 years ago, that the shy and gentle pygmy people of Central Africa were discovered by the West. Then groups of them were taken away from their forest homes and brought to Europe and dressed in children's clothes and stared at almost as if they were indeed creatures from some other planet. They quickly proved that they were as intelligent as you or I, when one of them learnt within a month or 2 of being in Europe to play the piano to the delight of his friends. Some thousands of pygmies still live in the forests of the Upper Congo, but as they are introduced to the ways of civilization and get clothes and houses to live in, so they tend to catch Western diseases and die. Sadly, in another 1,000 years, they may no longer exist, and then this ancient race of people will really become a legend, with all the mixed-up facts and fantasies that are part of most legends. Only 300 years ago, it was thought that baboons were at least partly human, and this is how they're described. The west regions of Ethiopia have a great store of these baboons. Some are beasts without a head, but with eyes and mouth in their breasts. But it is the error of vulgar people to think that they are men. They know how to take kernels out of nuts, like men do, and find the meat therein. They also drink wine and eat venison, which they roast in the sun. Some there are able to read and write. They cannot speak, and yet they can understand the Indian language. Their heads are like dogs, and their other parts like men. But the dog-faced man of legend probably came from another place, from Madagascar. That's the home of monkey-like creatures called lemurs. And this is the biggest of them, the giant lemur. It's called the Indris. And this name itself has a strange history. The man who wrote this book, a Frenchman called Sonoras, was the first European to see an Indris. He was out with his native guides in the forest, and he heard them call out, "Indris, Indris," and point to the giant lemur. He jumped to the conclusion that Indris, therefore, must be the creature's native name, so he formally gave it that name. But what they were really calling out was, "Indris, look at that, look at that." The Indris is indeed hard to get to see. It lives only in one particular part of the forest, an area that is daily shrinking as the forest trees are cut down for their valuable wood. Long before you can get close to the animal, you can hear its strange cries. Sonoras said it was like listening to a child crying, but the creature itself is rather beautiful and very shy. Really very little is known about them, or why they should only be able to live in this small patch of forest. For when captured, they've never survived for more than a few days. The Madagascan authorities are trying to protect them, but unless we do learn more about them and their unique habitat, they may only too soon disappear altogether, and then no one will be able to say, "Look at that." Mind you, some of the stories of the fairy tale monsters and giants of long ago have explanations that are actually quite ordinary. When Ulysses, the hero of ancient Greece, landed on the island of Sicily, he did battle with the Cyclops, a race of one-eyed giants who hid among the caves at the base of Mount Etna. Other stories of giants who lived in caves were told particularly in Italy and Sicily. Later, their bones were discovered and put on public display. Even the huge skull of a so-called genuine dragon was discovered and is still to be seen in the marketplace at Klagenfurt in Austria. Now we know that what they had really found were the bones of extinct animals, cave bears and mammoths and rhinoceros and prehistoric elephants. If you look at a mammoth or elephant skull from the front, it does look a bit like a giant human skull with a single eye socket, especially without its tusks. The socket is, in fact, the elephant's nasal cavity. But if you've never seen a real live elephant, it would be quite easy to invent for yourself a giant one-eyed person from its bones. Ulysses' Cyclops, perhaps. Another strange belief of past ages was that somewhere in the mysterious East was a race of people with huge feet. It was said they have but one foot, of which the sole is so right long and so broad that they cover them in the shadow therewith, when the sun cometh over direct on them. A very quaint idea. Or is it? The legend of a large hairy monster called Bigfoot still exists in America today. In fact, in America, it's become big business. You can buy Bigfoot t-shirts and Bigfoot ashtrays and cufflinks and all the other tourist mementos in the town of Willow Creek in California. The American Bigfoot is meant to be a giant hairy man that lives in the pine forests of the Rocky Mountains and has feet 16 inches long. The Bigfoot legends began, it seems, in Canada in 1811 with reports of an abode of apes in the Rocky Mountains. In 1924, a group of miners just over the border in the United States reported their camp was attacked in the middle of the night by hordes of apes, and the place is still called Ape Canyon. The same year, another miner described having seen a family of 4. He described them as being 7 to 8 feet tall and walking upright like humans. At the time, he didn't tell anyone about them, fearing, so he said, that no one would believe him. And it was another 30 years before his story came out. And by that time, reports of people in many parts of the Rocky Mountains finding trails of unknown animals with huge feet had become fairly common, and the hunt for Bigfoot was on in earnest. But only one person has ever seriously claimed to have seen the creature in recent years. He was Roger Patterson, and this is his story.
In 1967, the 20th of October, myself and Bob Gimlin were going into Northern California area. It's in the Humboldt County there. And this is about 40 miles back in the wilderness. The nearest little settlement is a town called Orleans. There's approximately 17,000 square miles in there that are unmapped. and it's a very primitive area, very rugged area. We had been in this area trying to find evidence of the giant creatures called Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and we had started to come around a bend. Was riding this little horse here. His name's Peanuts, and he shied and jumped backwards and reared up, and as he did, I tried to pull him down, and as I did so, I pulled too hard, and we both fell to the ground. I was able to get up, and as I held the horse by the reins and come around him, I then looked over to my left, and I seen this creature, and it was standing by the creek there about 120 feet away from us. And then it started moving away from us, walked up the bank and turned around, looked at us again, and I was able to get into my saddlebags and get my camera out and start shooting pictures. I yelled at Bob to cover me in case the creature did turn and attack us. At this point, when I was able to start getting pictures, she had walked up the bank and was going on across this sandbar. The creature was massive. I would say that it was 7 to 7.5 feet tall and probably 350 to 500 pounds. It was taking an average of 43-inch stride walking, and they measured 14.5 inches long, each print, and 5.5 inches wide.
But what did Patterson actually see? Perhaps someone was playing a hoax on him. It's happened before. 700 years ago, when Marco Polo visited the East, he wrote, "Certain people make it their business to catch a species of monkey having a face resembling a man's. They shave off its hair, leaving it only where it grows naturally on humans, in such a way that they have exactly the same appearance of little men. They sell these to trading people who carry them to all parts of the world." Well, while Bigfoot was leaving his tracks somewhere here in the Rocky Mountains, across on the other side of the world, somewhere here in the Himalayas, another uncertain animal left footprints which started exciting newspaper stories about the Himalayan Yeti, or abominable snowman. It was this photograph of a large footprint in the snow, a footprint 12 inches long, showing the marks of toes and a heel, that started the international Yeti hunt. The photograph was taken in 1951 by Eric Shipton, a very distinguished Everest climber, on his 6th expedition to the Himalayas. He was doing a reconnaissance with 2 other climbers when they came on a trail of footprints. They followed it for about a mile, taking photographs. Each print was large, and the length of the stride indicated a heavy animal walking on 2 feet. The photographs were sent back to London and caused a great stir, so much so that Shipton himself was flown home to tell his story to the Royal Geographical Society. Then, at once, everyone remembered old stories told by previous Himalayan explorers, stories of unexplained footprints, of unknown animals glimpsed among the rhododendrons, of strange cries heard at night, of local legend of the wild man of the snows. Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, who climbed Everest with Edmund Hillary, said that his father had seen one, and that Sherpas thought it was very unlucky to see a Yeti. But he took his young daughter to the monastery of Pangboche, where they were shown the skin of a Yeti, which I must say looks very like a bear skin, and the scalp of another. Hairs taken from this scalp prove it to be a man-made cap, but the hairs themselves aren't from a bear, but from a rare mountain goat. One of the monks said the Yeti is just a bogeyman that Tibetan mothers tell their children stories about. So for a few years, the abominable snowman story died down. Until, in 1970, Don Willans, who was leading an expedition to Annapurna, had a new story.
We were just putting our packs down to make a camp for the night when there was a commotion at the back of me high on a ridge, and I saw the Sherpa look up, and he just said, "Yeti coming." Well, I whipped round, and just in time to see a sort of loping creature drop out of sight behind the ridge. Anyhow, the next night, No, I just had a feeling that if this creature was still around, it would show itself. And I watched for about 20 minutes, and I was just getting to the point where I was so cold I couldn't be bothered to watch anymore. And then I saw what was a dark patch in a shadow that had seemed to me to have moved. Suddenly, it bounded right out into the moonlight. It was almost as if it had realised that it was being watched, the feeling that I'd had for a long time. And anyway, it was funny. It went straight for some crags and disappeared into the shadow underneath the crags. And then I definitely got the impression it was an ape-like creature bounding along on all fours. And I felt that that was the last I'd ever see of it.
There are no known large apes in that area, but there are monkeys, though not in the cold mountains above the tree line. There's this one, the rare golden and white Chinese snow monkey, which has been seen 13,000 feet up in the mountains of China. It was only discovered recently, so it's possible that there could be more monkeys that simply haven't been discovered yet. But monkeys are vegetarians and couldn't stray far from the trees of the lower slopes and survive. And as for them being fierce and frightening, well, that could be just part of the legends. Anyway, the search for the Yeti still goes on. A Japanese expedition is planning to spend 2 years looking for it with helicopters. Personally, I think there must be an animal there, and it's just not been explained. I'm sure it's not a hoax. But perhaps the abominable snowman does live in the dense rhododendron forests of the lower mountain slopes, and not among the snowfields where it's usually looked for. And that's why no one has found it yet. Only last week I was having a meal with a young American scientist who just returned from the Himalayas, and he told me that one morning when he woke up, he found outside his tent a trail of large footprints. Whilst he'd been asleep, some large animal had passed by. Coming on a set of unknown footprints can be very scaring. I remember when I was in the jungle of Borneo, I was working with a famous zoologist, John McKinnon. For some years, he had been making a close study of orangutan in the wild. To get close to them, he had lived in the forest with them, moving and eating and sleeping when they did. And so he had become a sort of forest man, quite at home by himself with his animal companions. Then one day, as he told me, he was down by the edge of a river when he came on an unexpected set of fresh and perfect footprints. He couldn't decide whether they were human or animal, but he had never seen anything quite like them before, and quite suddenly he was very, very frightened. The forest that he had come to know so well was suddenly full of the unknown. The unknown by itself just makes us frightened. Once we know all about animals, we usually realize that they're more scared of us than we are of them. When I was last in Borneo myself, there was a particular kind of monkey I very much wanted to see. I first started trying to observe and photograph these animals over 15 years ago. Again and again, I had had no luck. But now, for the first time, it seemed that I was going to get a really clear view. This is a truly rare sight, for this monkey is hardly ever seen alive outside Borneo. Only about a dozen individuals have ever lived for any length of time in captivity. Part of the reason why it is so difficult to maintain is its diet. Here in the wild, it dines every day on the Soneratia mangrove. And from the rate at which they were all stuffing the leaves into their mouths, it was clear that they needed huge quantities every day to keep going. It's likely that the mangrove leaf is not particularly nourishing, except when taken in quantity. However that may be, to the proboscis monkey, it's almost an essential. The effect on these particular trees was severe. The old male was taking the last of the relatively untouched branches, and the female up in the bare branches at the top was reduced to searching for leaves one by one. Farther downriver, we could see that the family as a whole had stripped and probably killed all the mangrove for several hundred yards downstream. It seems that this troop must have been feeding in this particular patch of the mangroves for weeks. The female polished off the last of her leaves and moved away. But the male still had a little left, and it was he that fascinated me. Sometimes, I must confess, He seemed to me to be irresistibly comic. But then I remembered that the small, delicate-featured Malay people in these parts have a special word for the proboscis monkey. They call them orang Belanda, white men. But it's not always so easy to make a joke. For hundreds of years, explorers have come back from Africa with terrifying stories of hairy monsters, the wild black men of the Congo jungle. So fierce and so terrible were they that they were a legend to themselves, the gorillas. Now they've been studied at close quarters, and we know that they're very big. An adult can be 6 feet tall, and the most manlike of apes. But they're extraordinarily good at using their hands. But far from being fierce and dangerous, they're shy vegetarians and live with their families in the deepest jungle, as far away from man as possible. We are certainly more dangerous to them than they are to us. But to some extent, you know, we rather like to turn animals into monsters, to make them bigger and fiercer, and sometimes almost as clever as we are. We still write books and films and stories every bit as fantastic as the old fairy stories. Battle for the planet of the apes. Doctor Who and the Daleks. The land that time forgot, the lost world. And most famous of all monster films, the one I saw when I was a child about Kong, the giant gorilla, King Kong. Ah, marvelous.